Can business thrive in the era of aging? Welcome to the call. I'm Jay Sapsford. For centuries, growth was built on a simple assumption: more workers, more consumers, more momentum. But that period is coming to an end. Today, the world is aging and fertility is falling. That means a demographic reversal and a shrinking workforce, just as we need to rebuild and revive growth. A new report by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development says we'll need all solutions, from immigration to AI. So today we ask, are we ready for this brave old world? Our guest today is the chief economist of the EBRD and the report's lead author, Beata Javorcik. Beata, welcome to the call.
Thank you, Jay.
Beata, we've been warned for decades of overpopulation, of too much consumption and impact on the environment. So let me start with a simple question. Why should we be worried about population decline?
2/3 of people globally live in countries where fertility is below the replacement rate. That means that the population of those countries is shrinking. And as fewer people are working, they are producing an ever smaller pie, an ever smaller GDP. But because the population size overall is shrinking more slowly than the working age population, everybody gets a smaller piece of the pie. So in other words, shrinking population translates into eroding of living standards.
So you've done some work in this report that sort of measures the potential impact on GDP going forward in the areas of coverage of your bank. I wonder if you could share with me that calculation, how you arrived at it.
Essentially, what we show that this purely arithmetical calculation that I explained, that this ever smaller pie is being shared among people who are consisting of working age population and the large number of dependents. Already today, we see that this force is a headwind when it comes to growth of GDP per capita. And in the next 25 years, in the countries where we are as an institution operating, so think emerging Europe, it will shave off almost 0.5 percentage point from growth of GDP per capita.
That's a pretty significant number. Now, here in the United States and in many countries in Europe, we have compensated for this through migration. How much migration would we need in order to maintain our living standards at this point?
Essentially, the amount of migration countries would need to compensate for these demographic headwinds is too large to be sustainable politically. So in the case of the US, we are talking about larger inflows of migration than was the case in the last decade. In countries in emerging Europe, we are talking about 1% of population, migration accounting by 1% of today's population coming every single year. So these are huge annual inflows that would be needed.
We're putting up a couple of charts here. First, life expectancy has surged around the world, and on average, we're living to be 73 years old today. That compares with 48 years old in 1960. That's a huge increase of more than 25 years. During that time, the global fertility rate, as you noted earlier, which is the average number of children that a woman will have in her lifetime, has fallen from 5 children in 1960 to 2.2 children today. And in many countries, as you noted at the beginning, it's even lower. So as we go below this replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman, let me ask you, what does this do for a nation? What are the dynamics that really impact a nation's prospects for economic growth?
Well, innovation is likely to slow down. So if you believe that in every society there is a fixed percentage of people who have the potential and interest in becoming innovators, then a smaller population would mean fewer inventors. But of course, the situation is not hopeless. We could look for missing Einsteins, for women who tend not to be interested in STEM subjects, for people from disadvantaged backgrounds who probably don't get the education they would need to become inventors.
So the EBRD was created to help Central and Eastern Europe adjust to a market economy. How is this demographic challenge impacting those countries?
Well, the countries in Central and Eastern Europe have made enormous progress when it comes to economic growth. They are poster children for a successful economic transition. Many of them have joined the ranks of advanced economies. But they got old before they got rich. So, in other words, the median person in those countries is above 40 years of age. That's the same demographic profile you see at advanced economies. But these countries are 3 times poorer.
You also cover some countries in the Near East and around the eastern side of the Mediterranean. I understand that some of these are probably going to benefit from a youth dividend, and it sort of speaks to this uneven nature of this demographic challenge that we're facing. I wonder if you could expound on those countries.
So North Africa, so countries around southern Mediterranean, sub-Saharan Africa, these are countries which are very young. The median person in sub-Saharan Africa is only 18. But the challenge they are facing is how to create jobs for the large number of young people entering the labor market every year. So they have the opportunity to benefit from this demographic dividend. But doing so, it's not easy because in many of these countries, about a third of young people are neither in education, nor in training, nor in employment. And this opportunity to benefit from favorable demographic trends will be fleeting because even in those countries, we are seeing falling fertility rates.
So here's a question from one of our members. If we're all living longer, why don't we just raise the retirement age and maintain the workforce size?
That's an excellent question. And the short answer is people don't want to work longer. Uh, so essentially, what you see across countries is that people retire earlier than the statutory retirement age. Um, if you look at what people think about government spending more on pensions, in all but 4 countries, the majority is in favor. So people don't want to work longer, people don't want lower pensions.
Right.
But working longer is really what will need to happen.
Okay. Now, you had talked about the lack of innovation or the decline in innovation as the population declines. Is it also influenced by the fact that older people tend to be less innovative than younger?
Not necessarily. They produce somewhat different innovation. I think the more binding constraint is the fact that older people are more risk averse. So they may be more conservative, less open to new technologies, for instance, to AI adoption. And therefore, an older workforce may forego some of the productivity improvements that you could see among younger people. For instance, we show in our report that companies that adopted AI tend to have younger managers and a younger workforce.
I see. And how much hope can we put into AI and robotics and these sort of things in raising our productivity, which but my understanding is that's going to be key to helping us make this transition.
Well, there is a very large range of estimates of what AI can do for productivity. But even employing the more optimistic estimates, we show in the report that relying on AI is not enough. What you need is a combination of migration, increased productivity through AI, and working longer, as well as greater labor force participation of women.
Okay, now I grew up in Japan and spent about half of my career there. So this next question from one of our members really resonates for me. Is Tokyo has been a thriving city, and a lot of people come from the countryside into to that corridor between Tokyo and Osaka. Meanwhile, the countryside gets depopulated. Why is the population decline greater in rural areas? Asked one of our members.
Um, because cities typically offer higher wages. In cities, you have high density of ideas. Workers become more productive. You have these spillovers of knowledge from innovative companies. So people like the lifestyle, they like higher wages. And also, as countryside is depopulating, it's much more expensive to provide public services there. Think about schools or transport. So the services provided there are shrinking.
Okay, I'm asking my colleague Scott to put up a quote from your report. It seems to me that the political risks are one of the most underappreciated aspects of this challenge that we're all facing. And here's the quote. As societies age, they tend to become more conservative and less accepting of pension reforms and risk-taking in search of economic growth. Beata, if aging voters make up a majority or an ever larger proportion of the voting public, won't they block the reforms and policies we need to address this challenge?
That's exactly the concern. So, what we are saying in the report is that the time to act is now, because now it's still politically feasible to introduce pension reforms that will bite in the future. As the electorate ages, and we know that older people tend to vote more frequently than younger people, their preferences will be more salient and they are likely to block pension reforms. We show in the report that for the elderly, what matters is healthcare and pensions, while for the young voters, the top priority is education.
So this comes at a time when our politics is already polarized across the West. Does this become another factor that makes that polarization even deeper?
Indeed, but it will be a slightly different type of polarization between the generations. And, the young people are the ones who are going to bear the burden of ever higher pension systems, of ever higher debt, public debt that, most countries in the world are accumulating today like there is no tomorrow.
Okay, I'd like to speak to some of the solutions that are being implemented around the world. We've talked about migration. We've talked about expanding or raising the retirement age. What other pronatalist policies out there do you see as having effect, at least at the margins, if not as a total solution?
So many countries have tried to encourage people to have children. And so far, the evidence has been quite mixed. Typically, what happens when you increase child benefit or if you offer tax breaks to families that have children, what happens is that people are having children earlier. So they make the decision to have a child or children earlier, but they don't have more children in total. So, in other words, the total fertility rate is not changing. Um, so this is telling us is that, we need a combination of policies, policies to keep people working longer, as well as policies that make it easier and more attractive to have children, including childcare, provision of kindergartens, and so on and so forth.
So that leads to the question of getting more women into the workforce, which is still, in many countries, an underutilized source of labor and of potential growth. What specifically needs to happen for that to take place?
Well, childcare is accessible, um, cheap childcare, so quality but affordable childcare is what is needed. What also is needed, flexibility at work, ability to work flexible hours. We actually ask in our reports who holds jobs that are age friendly. So these are jobs where you can work flexible times, which don't involve a lot of stress, which don't require physical strength. And what we found out is that these are young women with university education who tend to hold these jobs because these jobs are more compatible with household duties and taking care of children.
Are things like parental leave also something that are part of your calculations in this?
Parental leave certainly helps. What we see globally is that women who have children reduce their working hours. Because they often go part-time, they change from working in the private sector to public sector. If they are entitled to a considerably long maternity leave, as is the case in many European countries, they become less attractive employees. So many firms don't want to hire young women. But if young men are entitled to paternity leave, then suddenly women are less disadvantaged in the labor market.
All right. Well, how about the fiscal challenges? We take a look at the members of the OECD countries, and it seems like everyone's debt to GDP ratio is rising. There's some greater than this. Japan's, of course, is the highest. They've been facing with this challenge for the longest time. What sort of reforms are needed to address that challenge?
Well, it is very difficult for policymakers who face short electoral cycles to curb the debt, to borrow less, to introduce austerity. So, what we really need is to mobilize young voters, because at the end of the day, it's the young voters who are going to be paying off those ever growing mountains of debt.
And it's going to be challenging if the number of those younger voters relative to the general population is declining. And so I could see how that's going to be a very good challenge. I'd like to turn to business here. As our final question for you, I wonder if I might be able to put up on the screen here. This is from the Horizon, a deck of geopolitical questions that we on the Global Intelligence Desk use to engage with our members. Let me ask you, can business grow as populations shrink?
Yes. I mean, think about the example of the US, where manufacturing employment has been going down very sharply for a few decades, but value added in manufacturing has been going up. The answer is productivity growth. But of course, increasing productivity is not easy. And that's why we need to find those missing Einsteins, because smaller population may mean fewer innovators.
All right. Well, we deeply appreciate you joining us today and shedding light on this extremely important story. Beata Javorcik, Chief Economist at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our audience has gotten their shot of informational espresso and is ready to tackle the day. We're off for the holidays, but we'll be back on January 6th with our very own Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Head of Strategic Advocacy here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We'll ask Neil to share his insights into U.S. policy and how that will impact America's standing in the world for the year ahead. Miss a live episode? Catch the replay on our website, LinkedIn, or on YouTube. You can also listen to the Call's podcast edition on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you to you, our members, for joining us, and we wish you all a restful holiday season. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.